Welcome to Get the Elephants Out of the Room. I'm Chris Webber. We all have to deal with difficult people at work, difficult managers, difficult colleagues, and difficult customers. In this podcast, we share stories and experiences of people like you who face these challenges and share their secrets to success. Our mission is to help everyone overcome obstacles and to become more confident, better communicators. So sit back and relax while we unravel the mysteries of another difficult person. In this episode of the podcast, it's going to be a solo episode, and I'm going to talk about accountability and creating a culture of accountability in an organization. And I'm going to reflect on some of the recent episodes that I've done on the podcast, because I think they're really great examples. So let's talk a little bit about the problem that we're trying to solve and the issue that we're facing when it comes to taking accountability in organizations. The biggest issue we deal with is not necessarily the people around us. It's the voice in our head that is warning us against doing what it is we're about to do. That's the challenge that we face when we think about a culture, because culture starts with self. And so if there's something stopping you from speaking or encouraging you to take on certain behaviors, then that is the start of where culture begins and ends. I'm a fan of Steve Peters, the psychologist, and his model of the chimp and his book, The Chimp Paradox. And he describes in that book the loudest and most influential voice in our head is not our logical mind telling us what we need to do to secure the best, most logical result. It's an emotional voice that has a particular self-centered agenda. The emotional voice is not great at calculating the numbers and assessing the value of what it is we're about to do. It doesn't think about the long-term financial impact. What it does do is compare the perceived status that it predicts will happen as a result of our behavior, and it uses this comparison to present options that it believes will help us to look good and impress people who it wants to be judged by positively. And it stops us from doing things that might reduce our status in their eyes. And so, what I want to talk about today is how this voice can stop us from doing things that our logical brain knows to be the right thing in the long term because of the true value that's available if we did do that right thing. And that is where taking personal accountability begins and ends. Because if we can create a culture where people don't listen to the voice in their head, or they listen to the voice in their head that's telling them to do the right thing despite the impact it might have, then you're starting to create and engineer a culture of performance. In recent episodes, as I said, I spoke to two people who were faced with customer challenges where many of us would have heard a voice telling us to stop and to somehow shift the problem to someone else to deal with because it was going to create too much personal status risk. These were problems where customers were unhappy, customers were frustrated, customers were angry. And the temptation there is to say, that is going to affect my career. That's going to affect the relationships that I have. And therefore, somebody else needs to deal with this. I need to find someone else to take accountability, someone else to blame. But both Michael and Anthony ignored this temptation. They ignored the temptation to take the easy option to let someone else deal with the problem. They had courage. They had the courage to face stressful conversations and to do so with humility. The result was that they earned the respect of very angry customers and built strong foundations for partnerships that has lasted many years. And they also sent really strong signals to their colleagues and to their teams that they were prepared to take on these risks. And they were able to do so and earn greater respect and status from their colleagues, from their teams, because they took the risk, because they did difficult things. And I think that is the ultimate moment, because when we take on difficult things, there is risk. There is risk of failure, risk of making mistakes. And in the short term, we want to escape those things. But in the long term, having taken those risks, the people around us think, wow, how good is this person that they did hard things? The voice in our head can only think about the immediate moment. And that's the important aspect here. That when it's telling you to take an easy answer, when it's telling you to stop, when it's telling you to be careful, it's only thinking about right now. It's not thinking about 6 months from now, 2 years from now, the future. They have no visibility of a future where facing into a difficult conversation now could deliver greater rewards and status later. They can only see that immediate stress and that immediate risk. And that is where you need to be courageous. That is where you need to embrace short term stress for the benefit of long term gain. For all those people who take ice baths, that is what they're trying to teach, is that yes, an ice bath is uncomfortable. Yes, it is cold, but it's not about the ice bath. The ice bath itself has got mixed physiological feedback about what it delivers for you. But what it does do is you control your mind and you say, I'm prepared to deal with this discomfort to show myself that I'm in control and that I'm in charge of how I feel and what I do. And I'm not just going to take the easy path. As far as I'm concerned, this really fits into my vision. I want the examples of Michael and Anthony to become beacons for you and for your colleagues. I have a mission to help people to have the confidence to deal with difficult moments at work. I want to help you to create a culture where this courage is rewarded and celebrated. Because when it is, then it becomes something which is high status, a badge that everyone wants to seem to be wearing. And that means that you need to lead from the front when it comes to humility, courageous conversations, and being accountable for decisions that you make. So what does that mean? What actions can you take? How can you do this? How can you own this? Well, there's three things that I'd like you to reflect on. The first one is to put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're about to talk to. You've got a difficult conversation upcoming, you've got something that you need to address, something you need to deal with. Put yourself in their shoes. Ask yourself, if you were them, how would you be feeling about what has happened? And what would you like to hear or see next from you? It could be that they're unaware that there's a problem. If they're unaware that there's a problem, then you're going to surprise them. So, how would you feel about dealing with that surprise? If they are aware of the problem and they're expecting some feedback, how would you want that to be delivered? And perhaps they're expecting a different response. Perhaps they're anticipating something positive, where in fact what's going to happen is something negative. How would you want that to be delivered? And I think there's a rule which needs to be applied here. And the rule is that there is no perfect answer. I've been in a number of difficult conversations over the years through my career and through my life. And often feedback comes back that, oh, you shouldn't have done it that way. I'll give you an example. Um, you should have had a face-to-face meeting with me. If you're going to give me bad news, I want you to come and at least make the effort to meet with me face-to-face. In another occasion, I made that effort. I learned that lesson. I went and had a face-to-face conversation with somebody. Then the feedback was, why would you go to all that trouble to come to meet me face to face, to travel, to come and see me if you were going to give me bad news? You just got my hopes up. You just set expectations. And I think part of that is a human response, which is when we hear bad news, when we deal with bad news, it's negative. And therefore, we're going to have a negative reaction to it. So there's no perfect way of doing it, but at least you can be empathetic and think about how you would want that to be delivered and at least make an effort to be respectful of that. Second piece of feedback I would offer is to be empathetic but realistic. In the case of Anthony, the customer was really angry. They felt that they were being exploited by his company, that they were taking price and profiteering at his expense. He felt powerless. He felt overwhelmed. He was angry. What he really wanted was better pricing. However, that was not possible. What Anthony did was be realistic about what was possible and about the limits. And he supported his arguments with evidence and data to support his position, to evidence the fact that there was nothing they could do. He couldn't give better prices. And facing into that reality is something that shows courage and accountability. It's very easy to leave the door open. I can see what I can do. Let me go and talk to someone. Let's go and work on it. But the truth is that at times we make those excuses when we shouldn't. We should be just truthful about where the edges are. And I encourage you to be realistic and honest about those things. And the next thing I want you to think about is to be curious about options. We operate from a perspective that we know the answer and we know what it is that they want. We make guesses and predictions. And we do so often under stress, worried about how they're going to react, worried about what they're going to say. And so we try to, guess the answer, guess what their solution is. I want you to be more curious than that. Try a trick of flipping and imagine a world where you take the total opposite view of what you expect them to want and then model that idea. Ask yourself, what does it mean if I'm completely wrong about my assumptions about what do they want? In the case of Anthony, the customer was demanding a lower price. What was more interesting was a solution that didn't tie them to one supplier, giving them control and choice. The expectation is he wants a better price, but the truth is that he actually wants more control over the decision making about what he buys, when he buys, and where he buys it from. That is the essence of procurement, and that's the customer that he was dealing with. If you start trying to solve a problem which is just about price, then you're going to be on a dead end. But if you're curious about what he's really thinking, what else is happening, how can I flip this and look at it from a different perspective, it opens up more options and more solutions that you might want to consider. I think a good example that I want to share is about offering feedback to customers when they ask for investment. I see this across many industries, manufacturers who try to build partnerships with key customers. And often customers will come and ask for investments in particular programs or projects that their organization is running. Perhaps it's for data, for information, for media, for promotions, for business development, market development, a whole range of different things. And these things are not always fully thought through, fully considered for with returns for their suppliers. Indeed, often they are just opportunities for their own business to earn more from the relationships that they're working with, to secure more investments. And so when they ask, what often they do is they position the opportunity as something that you should want. They make out that it's about being a good partner and a privilege to be asked and to invited to invest in them. And that makes it really difficult for you as a supplier to say no. Now, sometimes they do this deliberately and sometimes not. But what they're actually doing is creating an emotional connection between making them happy and saying no to requests. They are creating a tension where the relationship appears to be dependent on saying yes to this particular program or project. That's a hard place to be because within sales, we're focused on a couple of things. One is the results, the business results we get. And the second is the relationships we have with important customers. And very often the temptation is to prioritize results over relationships because that's what the voice in your head is telling you. Your voice in your head is telling you, be liked, don't be rejected, don't risk the relationship over something so small. And you start to justify the money. What makes this more complicated is often when senior people are asked, perhaps in a meeting or an event, by the customer, can you invest in this? Can you support us on this project? If they indicate yes before returning to the office and then they leave more junior people to manage the relationships with customers or to justify an investment that no one thinks is a good use of money, then it gets even worse. Because then they're not responsible for what actually happens. They are leaving it to someone else. And then you're not sure as a part of the team whether you're supposed to push this investment through because it was something that they talked to the customer about, or whether you're supposed to kill it because it's a terrible idea and you don't think it's worth the investment of the organization. And so now you've got a double problem. Internally, what about your reputation, your relationship with your boss, and how you're going to see with the organization, and the customer who is waiting for you to invest? That is a trap that is hard to get out of. And your leadership and managers can help you with this. There's a great example. I've just finished reading Dark Towers, which is the story of Deutsche Bank and its relationship with Trump, amongst other things, that happened in its turbulent last 10, 15 years as a bank. And there's a great moment where a senior person is being called by Trump, and his PA wants to put Trump through, wants to put the call through. And this person, this leader, doesn't want to take that call. He believes that Trump is going to be really angry that a personal loan is not being approved by the bank. And he just doesn't want to answer the phone. The PA says, look, he is not going to give up. Trump is not going to give up. He's going to keep calling and calling and calling until he gets to talk to you. So you might as well take the call. The issue here was dealing with an unhappy customer, was dealing with somebody who's going to be told no, and then managing the reaction on the phone. He, as a senior person, didn't want to take that responsibility. He didn't want to be the one that says no to Donald Trump. Now, what's interesting about this is when he actually did take the call, Trump had been granted the loan by someone else in the business and was ringing this person to say thank you. And this person took all the credit for having the loan approved. But I think it's a great example of how those difficult calls are easy to ignore, to leave to someone else. What I want you to think about is a culture that's created when managers take responsibility for calling customers with bad news and for not leaving it to others, for being courageous enough to deal with the conflict and to deal with the discomfort. There are 4 things that you need to do if you're going to do this. How do you do it? Well, first of all, separate the business from the people. This request has not come from your customer as a human. They personally are not making demands. It is a transaction proposed by their organization. Now, this mental separation does enable you to consider the people differently from the action and the transaction. If you then consider the investment on its own merits and not connected to the person, you're thinking very differently about the impact that this decision might make, this choice might make. When you get the request, acknowledge the request and recognize why it makes sense. And then the third thing is consider it, so that you're being respectful and not immediately dismissive for a customer who actually you need to feel important, to feel valued, and therefore taking the time to pay attention to their proposals, listen to them, is a good use of time. But then you need to respond in a timely and personal way with a rejection of the offer in business terms. And what you might end up with is a phrase or a statement that sounds a little bit like this. So, thank you for the proposal and your invitation to invest in this particular project or program. We appreciate it's a good idea for your business, and we can understand why this is something that you'd be interested in doing. However, it's not something that's going to work for us. We've considered the value for the business, and we decided in this case not to proceed. We do look forward to continuing to work together on projects and programs where we know that they do deliver value for everyone, and we do appreciate the importance of the partnership and the relationship. It's just this particular program isn't going to work for us right now. Something like that allows you to retain the relationship with the people, be warm with the people, but also to be appreciative of value and protect your interests. And so I just want to conclude just by reflecting on the episodes previously with Michael and Anthony, and I encourage you go back and listen to these episodes. We explore more details, the stories that they told, and the examples that they shared. And In each case, they share a strong message for leaders who take accountability for relationships with customers. What really stands out for me on both of these stories was the fact that they could have handled accountability to others and avoided the conversations. They could have left it to someone else. Michael himself was in a leadership position and he was dealing with a customer who'd been promised a solution that had failed to materialize. Someone else had let him down. The easy action would have been to look internally and find someone to blame. Who was it in production? Who was it in distribution? Who was it in packaging that had created this problem? They could have created a whole swirl of reviews and discussions internally and been busy focused on a problem, but talking to themselves and not talking to the customer. In his business, they were supplying chemicals and they operate across a complex supply chain. His team, the sales business, were not the ones who failed to deliver the solution. So it would have been conceivable for him to leave it to someone else to solve, and maybe even sent a message to the customer and said, "It's not my problem, it's someone else's problem, they'll get in touch with you." But he didn't. He jumped in the car. He didn't even pick up the phone. Imagine how much easier that conversation would have been if he just picked up the phone. He could have had a 5-minute chat with the customer. "I'm very sorry, we're going to work on it, we're going to see you sorry." No, he jumped in the car. He took the salesperson with him because he wanted them to witness how he managed this situation, how he resolved the problem. And what he commented to me during the episode was that the salesperson that he took that day is still a really important contact of his and a good friend of his, and is now very senior in another business in the industry. And I'm really sure, reflecting on that these moments where you witness somebody taking responsibility, taking accountability for actions for the business, those are the moments that are powerful lessons in a career, formative lessons. When we witness and when we celebrate people who take accountability and who deal positively with difficult moments, then they are inspiring and they teach us how we should operate. That is where culture is built. Not on values on walls, but in the modeled behavior of leaders and colleagues. It starts with us taking accountability for difficult moments and difficult conversations, reflecting on how we are going to be the ones who have these difficult conversations. Imagine how different your business might be if, instead of celebrating wins all the time, people talking about what they've done, what they've achieved, how I've hit my targets, how I've hit my goals, you sat around and celebrated the people who did difficult things, people who identified problems, people who shut down a poor investment, or who managed a difficult conversation with a colleague, with a customer, with a supplier to fix something that everyone else had been avoiding. But you celebrate the fact that they did it the right way, not aggressively, not with power, not with leverage, not with threats, not with authority, not with humiliation, but with dignity, with respect, with empathy, and most of all, with clarity. Some wonderful lessons in accountability, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. And hopefully, there's some food for thought for you in this episode. I do encourage you to go and look back and listen to the other episodes where we've talked about this. And to find out more, do follow and subscribe to our newsletters and to follow us on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. I hope you took away some useful insights. Join us again next time when we unpick the behaviours of more difficult people. Until then, take care and see you soon.